Looking good, bud. Welcome back to the show. And you've directed. I just don't know how you keep doing this. You make some of my favorite documentaries I've ever seen. But how do you?
Thank you.
Well, I mean, capturing the Freedmans. You got the Jinx. How do you know when you have a good story?
I think we always try to go in without a preconceived notion of what the story is going to be. We just try to see what we can see. And in this case, it was so surprising because we never expected to have access to the Alabama state prison system. That's a very secretive system. Not that different than when I was making Capturing the Freedmans, and I thought I was making a film about professional children's birthday party entertainers, and later it turned out to be about child molestation, or, you know, the usual. Or we, started out making a film about Robert Durst and his
Well, you actually made a film
story.
about Robert Durst with Ryan Gosling and Kirsten Dunst.
And that film was sort of the origin story of Robert Durst, who had never been arrested or convicted of these murders. And then when the film was coming out, he just called me out of the blue and said, well, I hear there's this film about me, and I like that Ryan Gosling, and I'd like to talk to you about it. And then we didn't know that he was then going to sit down for 21 hours of interviews, that we were going to do this investigation, and he was going to get arrested based on the material in the film the day before the final episode.
I've never seen a documentary like that in my entire lifetime. I remember sitting in my apartment going, what? Because it wasn't like something you could just binge and watch all of it. It was you were waiting week to week to see what happened, and I was just like, this is just great. And then whew, he confesses, and you go, what is going on? It was mind-blowing.
Yeah, I felt sort of the same way.
I kind of get the same, yeah, I could see that.
What's going to happen next?
I don't know, yeah, you don't know what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
But when I'm watching the Alabama Solution, I kind of got that same kind of vibe. Because it starts, I mean, how did you choose Alabama and seeing the corruption behind the prison system?
You know, I was always interested in the problems with incarceration in America, and I was fascinated by Alabama, but it's such a secretive system. They don't let the press in. They don't even really let the government people in to see what's going on there. So, of course, what's going on there is not good. And I was talking to my daughter, who was 14 at the time and was a big reader, and she was reading a book by a man who had been wrongfully convicted in Alabama. And she said, I know you're interested in this. Maybe we should read it together. So we read it together, and then we just spontaneously decided to take a road trip, kind of father-daughter trip. We went down there, and we met a man who was the first black prison chaplain in the state of Alabama, and he said, if you're interested, why don't you come in? And I said, well, I'm a filmmaker. They're never going to let me bring cameras in. And he said, well, you know, the Lord works in mysterious ways, and let's see what happens. And we ended up being able to film for one day in that prison.
But you go, and it's kind of like a party. It's like a barbecue, almost. This is the truth. And then you're there filming this barbecue, and and then a couple of the incarcerated individuals go, of course you're here on this day. This is not life at all.
Yeah.
This is, they set you up. This is not what our life is, and you go, right?
Yeah, I mean, I said to the men when we first met them, my partner Charlotte and I, who were making the film, we said to them, you know, how are you doing? And they said, what you're seeing right now has nothing to do with our daily life. You're seeing this beautiful revival meeting, and they're feeding us food that we would never see in a million years. Our food says not fit for human consumption on the packages, and therefore, you know, you need to get into this. We need you to help. We need you to look in that building over there that you're not allowed to see. That's that tin building is where they've had men in there for in solitary confinement for 5 years, individuals. And so there was so many disturbing things that we were seeing, and then, of course, we get a little too nosy, and then they kick us out. Yeah. You know, which I wasn't that surprised by. You know, I
almost make it in the door.
Yeah.
Because you start getting in, they go,
yeah.
you can't do this. You can't. No one's allowed to see what's going on in here. But then you've become friends.
Well, we started. The warden said to us, "Don't talk to the men when you go inside. Just talk to these two men. These guys are okay to talk to. Everyone else is going to be dangerous and scary." And of course, we went in there, and very quickly we realized we felt much more comfortable with the incarcerated men than we did with the guards who were bringing us in. And it was such a revelation for them to say so openly, this is what you need to look at. These are all the hidden areas in this prison that you're not seeing, and we need you to get the word out. And then, of course, when we did that, the warden and other people said, well, it's time for you to go. And then we were worried that we weren't going to be able to tell the story. And then we had this responsibility because now people have told you this story. Nobody else is going to get in there.
You got to dig deeper.
And so we realized when we got out that we should start talking to some people who were out. And they said, you know, there's a network of leaders, these brilliant guys inside who've been managing, kind of leading a nonviolent protest effort, doing work strikes and doing hunger strikes. And they have access to contraband cell phones.
And they get these cell phones.
Well, it's funny, I didn't know when I first heard about it. I said, wait, people in prison have cell phones? And everybody said, no, of course they don't have cell phones. But then they did. And I said, you know, how do these phones come in? I was talking to one of the incarcerated men on a cell phone. And I said, where are these phones coming from? And he looked at me like I was an idiot. And he said, you know, we don't leave here, right? And I said, yeah. And he said, so who leaves and comes back in every day? And I said, the prison guards. And he said, bingo. Those are the people that are bringing in the cell phones. So it's ironic that the cell phones that are brought in by the prison guards to be sold to the men are the same thing that we were able to use in this investigation where we kind of collaborated with the men to show things like a murder. Like there's a murder in the film that happens sort of in real time, and we end up doing a collaborative investigation with the men inside. So it was absolutely extraordinary.
And I also thought it was interesting too. They wanted to FaceTime with you.
Yeah.
Because you want to just do this as a phone call?
No, it's all video. And they've said, look, we've been doing this for years. We need to get the word out on this. We realize we're taking risks, sometimes life or death risks to get this information out. That if they find us with cell phones, they'll put us in solitary confinement or they'll extend our sentences. We're willing to do this because there are 45,000 people in that state between the prisons and the jails who are locked in these secret institutions. And so they're really very selflessly trying to get the word out on all the other people that are in there. The two main guys in the film both have life without parole. So it's not like they're about to get out.
One guy,
they're trying to do this for the other people.
He's in solitary confinement.
Yeah.
And you're talking to him.
Yeah. When we filmed the opening of the film, we start talking to Robert Earl Counsell, who goes by Kinetic Justice. And it's like, honestly, it's like talking to Mandela. This is a guy who never should have been incarcerated. His crime had to do with somebody getting shot when he was in the process of getting run over by a car. So clearly that would have been a self-defense case. But he's a very, very powerful speaker and motivator. And you know, you can read his words and really feel inspired. I felt so lucky. And people say, well, these are unlikely heroes. It's kind of true that they're unlikely heroes, but heroes nevertheless. They're worrying about people other than themselves, and they're doing these extremely risky things to get the word out.
It's fascinating, and it's shocking, but also the governor of Alabama is a pretty big character in this. Have you heard from?
Yeah. Her name is Kay Ivey, and she and Steve Marshall, who's the Attorney General, are kind of presiding over this very deadly system. I'd like to believe they don't know everything that's happening in the system, but that's a little hard to imagine. She didn't react at all to the film since it came out at Sundance.
Really?
They had no comment. But then, when the film got nominated for the Oscar, she came out with a statement that was, we always knew the Oscars had a low bar. So, you know, here she is getting into fisticuffs with the Oscars. So we thought, well, you know, in a way, let's try to meet this with kindness. You know, maybe she doesn't know what she's doing. You know, she's called Meemaw. Maybe there's a grandma in there somewhere that would be worried about this. And so we reached out to her and to Steve Marshall, the Attorney General, and we said to them, we'd like you to come to Los Angeles, you know, March 14th, the day before the Oscars. We'd like you to watch the film with us and with the family members of some of the people who have lost their children in this system. 1,500 people have died in that system since we started making the film. And then we'd like you to acknowledge the problem and then come with us and those families to the Oscars. And so we reached out to her and invited Steve Marshall in the hope that there can be some kind of, you know, realistic meeting of the minds, or she can say, look, I'm going to stop denying this as a problem, or Steve Marshall's going to stop denying this as a problem.
Have you heard back?
We have not heard back yet, but we're hopeful.
Wow. It's amazing that you did this and keep doing what you do. Has anything changed?
We have seen a lot of change. We've seen a lot of people in Alabama. You know, we've shown the film maybe 125 times. And it's not just that it's on HBO. HBO was kind enough to let us show it in community centers and in libraries and in people's homes. And suddenly you see these many people in Alabama who felt shame because they've had a relative who's incarcerated, many of us do, and all those people are looking at each other saying, wait, this happened to you too. And so we've seen these protests emerge now, like just 4 or 5 days ago in Montgomery, there are a few hundred people that showed up on the steps of the Capitol with pictures of their loved ones who have died in the system. And again, peacefully saying, we demand change. We need this system to get better. And I'm hoping that they notice that. It's right outside the governor's window. And when you see hundreds of people standing out there asking for change, you'd like to believe that a public servant is willing to change.
Good for you. That's so good. I want to show a clip. Here's a look at Andrew Jarecki's Oscar-nominated film, The Alabama Solution. Take a look.
We were in these walled-off secret societies. These are state institutions. But it's one of the only state institutions that the public or the media has no access to. How can a journalist go into a war zone but can't go into a prison in the United States of America?
Andrew Jarecki, everybody. The Alabama Solution is available now on HBO Max. We'll be right back with a performance from Megan Moroney. Stick around, everybody.